Don't need to bang too hard.
Okay.
Okay. Let me get started with what we have. Welcome to City of Littleton Planning Board study session. Tonight we're just going to hear a presentation on the work. Where is it? The work that's being done by C&B Designs on the signage package wayfinding plan. And then Glenn is going to talk to us a little bit about some just procedures with the planning board and about the city council greet and meet sessions. We're going to just hear a little bit about that. And that's all we have tonight. So it's just a study session. But let's start with roll call.
Board Member Bolt. Chair Juzan.
Here.
Board Member Elrod. Board Member Graham. Board Member Moore.
Here.
Board Member Rudnicki.
Here.
Board Member Samuelson.
Here.
Board Member Miles. Board Member Schrader.
We just have a quorum. So we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, they're going to.
You didn't send out any notice just via regular email, so I inadvertently.
Glenn had sent out an email.
Everybody's Littleton address.
But not to
I didn't
our-
get anything.
Not, we always
Well,
get the 110
I don't ever
page.
check that unless I get an email from Ann saying to check that email.
I check on the
It's
check.
a two-step process.
Yeah, we listen to her. No.
Because I don't check that every day. I get 120 emails
Yeah,
a day.
you should check it
in
every
my
day.
office.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a normal meeting time. Generally, I'll get an inquiry. If somebody doesn't receive something, saying, are we meeting or are we not meeting? In this case, we
ended up
didn't.
checking it today because I thought there must be something wrong here.
Yeah,
But I didn't have time to look at that video that was on there.
okay.
Did notice that it was there, and I guess if we've had so few meetings in the past 3 months that maybe people are thinking we just got canceled again.
We just
Well, I know these two said they were not going to, and I'm not sure about Andrew, but Karina and RC definitely said,
They were
I
not.
can't make it.
Okay.
Well, I will make a note of it to continue to.
That'd be helpful.
I just made these.
Email
It's
them,
helpful,
check every
especially if there's something on there we want to look at, some material that we need to see,
Yeah.
that we know to go there and look. Otherwise, I just assume it's a regular study session of some kind.
Well, and we can't totally depend upon an email from her, but I just try to make it a point to look at the email on Thursday or Friday before a planning board meeting.
And another note is to just check the website because it is on the calendar.
Okay.
Just as easy to check the email.
I'm with you.
All else fails.
Yeah. I don't know. We're kind of out of our order here, but maybe we can talk about some of this other stuff related to email and stuff when Glenn starts talking about what he's going to say. So, approval of the agenda. We don't have minutes, do we?
We don't have minutes because it's a study session.
Yeah. Okay. So this is not a public hearing.
No,
We just are
it's just a study.
just listening to C&B. Where is she? Oh, there she is. Okay. So let's get right into that. And go ahead.
I do have a point of order as a member of the public.
I don't know what the procedure is. This is not an
I'd like to
open.
be recognized with a point of order, Chair Duzan.
Can a member of the public bring up a point of order? I doubt it.
Actually, I'm pretty sure we can. Anybody can bring up a point of order in a public meeting, and this is a public meeting.
Okay.
Robert's rules.
You gave us your comments and
I gave you a request to explain why on the fourth Monday of the month, this is a study session and not a regular session, which would allow public appearances and comment.
because we're just listening to a presentation, we don't have a case.
I would like to make a public appearance. It's the fourth Monday of the month. But by making this a study session and by not having meetings over the past 3 months, which Councilmember Jerry Valdez has commented on, you've prevented us, the public, from talking to you.
Well, I don't know what the proper course of action is in terms of where we are now, having posted a study session. And so we're going to stick with the study session, and we can bring up your concerns with the county attorney, and I will find out what the proper situation should have been, and I'll get back to you. So let's go ahead with the CMB's presentation.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, if I could just introduce Kristen Seifer, who is the founder and owner of C&B Design. She's got 20 years experience in landscape architecture, urban design, and planning. Some of her clients include the town of Avon, Englewood, Glenwood Springs, Steamboat Springs, Windsor, and Fort Collins. She's also a consultant to the Colorado Creative District Program. And as you'll, I think, find out, she's got a good knack with public outreach, and she's been our consultant on the Downtown Wayfinding Project, which I'm sure you all remember from the Downtown Neighborhood Plan. It was a recommendation that we provide a better way for folks to find our downtown and maneuver around it. So Kristen has a tough job in front of her doing that, but done a great job so far. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight about this project. The way I've structured the presentation is an overview of the process that we've gone through so far. I've brought banners as well that show the 3 different alternatives, and then I'm also going to show the draft of how we've brought those alternatives into a final design, which is still in draft format, but actually encapsulates the comments that we received for all of these designs, and I think is a nice spoiler. You guys are besides staff, you're the first ones to see it, so I'm pretty excited to show that to you guys. So as Glenn said, I am an urban designer, planner, thank you, and landscape architect. So I've done a lot of work in Colorado communities, not just in signage and wayfinding, but also in downtown planning and design. And I think one of the strengths of approaching this project, this signage and wayfinding project from a design perspective, is that we are able to look a little bit more critically at how those designs are really functioning from a signage and wayfinding standpoint. So one of the things that this is for Ralston Fields in Arvada, Colorado. This is the daytime and this is the night. And so one of the things that we really looked at with the signage for Littleton is how to create an environment that is positive in the day and the night, that is also respectful of the history and the culture and the community preferences for signage and wayfinding. Oops. I'm so sorry. This is, my son calls this the love seat. This is in Trinidad, Colorado, and their creative district actually overlaps their downtown district, and it's called the Corazon de Trinidad, or the Heart of Trinidad. And so when I came up with the logo and the palette for things, I also designed this bench, which is kind of, we call it the doily bench in my office because it kind of looks like a doily, but it's a bent steel product that like I said, we call it the love, well, my son calls it the love seat. One of the things that I really look at when I think about downtowns is time of day and use. So this fact of 80% of visitor spending takes place in a pedestrian-focused, intimate setting. That means that when you're looking at a downtown, where people are spending their money is in the Main Street district. And that's pedestrian-friendly, walkable, but also it needs to be transparent. So one of the things that we did very first when we kicked the project off is did the ladies-only sample tour. So stood outside, here I'll actually go through this. This statistic of 70% of consumer spending actually takes place after 6 p.m. is another statistic that we use to illustrate the ability for signage to function in a 24-hour environment, but particularly in that evening time when we have our free time as working people. That is when we tend to spend our money. And if you look at leakage, that's the kind of money that's spent that goes outside of a community. So the populace of any given community has a certain amount of money to spend. When they don't spend it in that community, it's called leakage. And leakage tends to happen when people are like, all the downtown shops are closed, so I'm going to shop on Amazon. Or I'm going to shop at the mall. But more likely in our busy world, it's a lot of online retail if you don't have this kind of attractive environment to stop by in after work. So our project scope and goals, when we began it, we really were talking about signage and wayfinding. Also, gateways are part of those things. So if you think about the football shape that is downtown Littleton's core, with, and I'm going to navigate by the landmarks I know, so forgive me, but like the donut shop north, right, where Prince goes into Santa Fe Drive. Then at the bottom, you're kind of at the gas station, Hudson Gardens. And then east and west, we've got the railroad on our east side is kind of the boundary of downtown, although you've got some really beautiful, attractive, compelling downtown things that are just right on the other side of that railroad track. And so we're definitely capturing that piece too. And then on the west side, you've got the intersection where the couplet of Alamo and Main comes together into Littleton Boulevard for that little brief snippet, and then crosses over Santa Fe. So those are really our gateways, and they're part of the signage program too. Then we're also working on the downtown brand and tagline, including brand experiences. So this really touches on something that I think is most directly associated with the trail and the pathway network. So we've got like Little's Creek Trail that connects to downtown, and then the Mary Carter Greenway Trail that's just west of downtown. And when you think about branding and experience, you want to create something that says, it's Saturday morning. What are you going to do with your time? And you package that for the public. And you say, I'm going to go for a bike ride. Then I'm going to go downtown Littleton and have a coffee and do some shopping. And then I'm going to bike ride back home. So that kind of brand experience where you really do need to tell people how to use your downtown space. It's not intuitive for everyone. They see Littleton and they're like, it's really charming and it's really cool. But unless you package that as an experience, whether it's a big experience like a once-a-year ladies-only sample tour, but what's really going to revenue generate is branding the everyday experience. What do you do after work in downtown Littleton? What do you do on the weekend in downtown Littleton? And make those into evocative bubbles that people can buy into and get tugged into doing. Then we're also looking at banner graphics for the poles. There's actually a new palette that's come out through marketing, so we're working with them, and I think pretty much relying on their palette for the next year, but definitely being around to help with the templates. And then the urban design and streetscape elements, so things like furnishings, trash, planters, seating, we're also touching on that piece. And this is a lot of text, so I'm not going to read through it, but the goals are really make downtown a legible Littleton, right? So you want to make sure that people know what's available in the downtown, how to get there, and then once they're downtown, how to get around within it, including some of those outlying areas that are just grabbable and so adjacent to downtown, but are not maybe visible or people don't understand that they exist. So when we talk about legibility, it's legibility to get here, it's legibility once you get around and you're here, and then it's legibility as far as what else does downtown and Littleton have to offer. So we're looking at transportation arteries. You know, I put my glasses here and I didn't. It's terrible. Oh my word, look at you guys. That's so much better. And my bifocals too, that's where I really noticed it. I couldn't read my thing. Okay, and then talking about the economic development piece. So this really touches very strongly on economic development insofar as when you've got a downtown retail and business community, they really rely on the public space to market their shop. So they've got their individual businesses, but then they also say, okay, what's drawing people to downtown Littleton in general if they are not coming directly to my store? So that economic development piece of making the retail environment more successful for downtown businesses, but also making it more attractive for new businesses. So we've got some vacancies downtown, not a lot, but what we want to do is show that it's a really, like Littleton is investing in its downtown and therefore it's a worthy place to invest. The timeline, here I've got my little dot, we're right at the end. So we've got about a month and a half of working through cost estimating, looking at how we parcel out the application of this palette over the next 2 years, maybe 3, so that we're not encumbering the city with a big purse string opportunity right away. We want to make sure that it's doable and also very successful in its first iteration so that people feel that it has moved forward. And in order to get there, we've gone through a couple of steps. So we really began this process with looking at existing conditions. That was document review. There's always, in every municipality, lots of work that has already been done. So really began on the backs of the people that have worked here already. There are some excellent documents that gave us directions. Then we also did an existing conditions report. That's where we went out with staff and individually did the photography and understood where the gaps were, where the opportunities were, and created a document that outlined all of those things. Then we also looked at downtown destinations. So within the football and then outside of the football, where do we want to direct people to go? These are largely civic destinations, but the downtown shopping district itself is also a destination in its own right, as is the community college, Hudson Gardens. And then we created a what signs are needed map. So this, it's hard to see, but every little dot is a kind of a sign. And I'll show you, like from this standpoint, if you look at the ABC palette, we've kind of got these vehicular pedestrian signs, and then we've got destination signs, street signs, historic, interpretive, informational type signs, and then the gateway elements. And broadly, that is the palette that we're looking at as far as what signs are needed. And then where they go is really dependent on how people circulate and how we want to point people around. So the other thing that we did initially is got that staff perspective. So walked and walked and walked with staff, looked at everything that was working and that was not working, particularly from a maintenance standpoint. So anytime we put something in the physical environment, what we're delivering as part of this project is also a maintenance plan. So what needs to happen on a monthly, more accurately yearly basis, but to understand like what it's going to take to upkeep the signage, not just to buy it and install it initially. So we did talk a lot on this walk about maintenance practices, maintenance capacity, and how things were currently maintained. And then we came up with some preliminary design options after going through all of that, and I've brought those here tonight. And once we got these designs, we took them out to the community. And this was the part that I found the most enjoyable, because Littleton is a great community for response. We actually got a lot of really thoughtful responses and a lot of really great feedback. So again, we began with the ladies only sample tour, which was an intercept survey. Then we did the Stern Park meet and greet, which sounds like you're going to cover, Glenn, how that went this evening. But from our perspective, we got some really good feedback there. And then we had banner displays in the library, the Buck Center, and the Town Hall Arts Center for actually a week beyond that date. They sort of lingered. We were getting such good response, I was loath to take them down. We've also had them up on the OpenLittleton.org feedback page, the Facebook page, and then I've had a series, after meeting initially with the Downtown Merchant Group, I've had a series of one-on-one meetings, mostly at the discretion of businesses that are interested in having those meetings, but we're coming up to about 20 of those conversations, and they've been really, really good. So the ladies only sample tour was literally wearing a placard and like partying down with the ladies only who showed up for the ladies only sample tour. The thing that we got 85 responses. What we noticed in the responses is that the ladies only sample tour draws from a big bubble. So we tracked zip codes. Most of the zip codes were, 80120 or contiguous. But then we had about 10% that were quite far away. And some of these people, it was their first time in downtown Littleton, so those were the ones that we really jumped on and said, okay, like, were you aware of downtown Littleton? Like, how did you get here? And overwhelmingly, we heard we were not aware of downtown Littleton at all. Or, I have gone down Alamo, but I never knew there was a Main Street. Or, I've gone down Main Street, but I never knew there were side streets or Alamo Street businesses or anything. So it was really pathway dependent. If they'd ever come to Littleton before, they had mostly gone on Santa Fe and not really realized there was a downtown. And then if they had been sort of downtown, they only knew about the part that they'd driven through. So that was really valuable data for us because, of course, Colorado is a place where we get lots of new residents all the time, and you definitely want to capture those new people in addition to the people who live here. So I used to live in Littleton, and it was incredulous to me that people had no idea that downtown existed, but they didn't. And I thought that that was the most important. Apart from the humiliation, I also wore the sign, the shame. But it was a really, really positive
85
experience.
responses and 3 arrests, right?
Yeah, toward the end of the evening, are we on TV? Oh, I feel bad. But anyway, there's a lot of I love downtown Littleton, right? There was a lot of love at the end. Okay, so then the next event we had was the Stern Park meet and greet. This was great because people were there and they were relaxed and they could take their time. And apart from some wind, which was a challenge, we had some banner deaths, but we had a lot of people who said, oh, this is great, and I'm able to talk to you. And we got 34 responses, all of them very thoughtful and considered. And actually, the lady in this thing, she's probably had her wedding now. She was planning her wedding, and she was there scoping it out. Then we had the banner and survey stations. Now, these were great. We actually got a little bit more responses than this, but complete responses were 271, which was wonderful. And again, because these were done in a format where people could write additional comments, we got a lot of granularity about not just the one that they liked, but the things that they liked about the other ones, or even though they loved one, they didn't like certain things about it. And the process of design is really not just coming up with 3 very different designs, but actually then melding them into a final one that pulls on all the good things of each, as well as new ideas that usually come from, frankly, the public and the users. And then we had the Open Littleton feedback and preferences. Now this was great too because people were able to not just say what they liked, but create priority lists of the option that they felt was the strongest. And the Facebook page the same. Facebook is a very open format, so people weren't able to just say, yeah, I like this one, but they gave us a lot of good feedback about why they liked something and why they didn't like something else. And then the merchant one-on-one conversations have been wonderful. So this is really understanding from a merchant perspective, where are the intersections between this project and what we're hoping to achieve and their business and what they're struggling with. So some of the struggles that merchants have largely to do with location. If you're on a side street or if you're on Alamo Street, it's a lot harder to get traffic and people into your business. And you can see that when you're driving on Alamo especially. There's kind of a lot of random sandwich boards and efforts to pull people in, to let them know that this is a viable part of downtown too. The other things that people talked about were signage, parking, very, very typical issues, but richly deep in regard to how they are laid out for each business person. The other thing that's been really valuable about these conversations is that people have really good ideas, right? Your business community is usually full of people who are very bright, who are very creative, and who are very committed to downtown Littleton. So the conversations that we've been having are, gosh, I've been thinking about something like this for 10 years, for 20 years. And here are my thoughts, and they're usually really good thoughts. So things like where would be a good place for a mural, where would be a great place for a sign, the creative idea of actually creating a sign that allows individual side street businesses to buy a placard that goes on a regular sign, but toward the bottom that actually points to your side street business, was an idea that helped bridge that gap between the dislike of all the sandwich board signs and the need to have a way to advertise your business as a side street business. So overall, we've had 305 paper surveys, 31 priority lists, 111 voting comments. So just we're actually, because Facebook is ongoing, so this has actually gone up, but we've got 441 preferences that we use to kind of take A, B, and C and create the D option that we have so far. The other thing that I wanted to point out before we move into design is the demographics of who we heard from. So the red line is 60 and over. Now, 60 and over is a big category, and when I spoke to City Council, the point was made, and I think it's a good one, that that's kind of a catch-all. There's a big difference in decade between 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 and above. So when I dug into the comments, trying to get a little bit more information about this 60 and over, it really fueled the ability to look at the signage from a legibility standpoint, As we get older, bifocals and glasses, right? The ability to read something clearly and make it understandable diminishes. So even when I looked at the signs with that eye and then dug back into even the state highway signs are going through a redo because of an aging population. So how fonts work, how spacing works, all of that lends for greater legibility. And so the D option really took the points that were good about A, B, and C as well as the latest, greatest, and made sure that everything is super legible. So that's one of the things that really came out of it is a deeper look from my perspective into what makes for a successful signage program for an aging population. So we're vibrant, but we're also very aware of legibility from that age group. So where we took the designs after A, B, and C went through is into the sketching, into the whiteboarding of how we create the D option. And the D option that we came up with, I'm really proud of because it takes things that people really like the cupola, like history, like light, and melds them all together in such a way that it feels sophisticated, but it also feels respectful of Littleton's history. So to dig into this a little bit, at the top of that sign is actually a product called Freeform, which is a clear, I actually have a sample, which is a clear product. Sharp in here, so usually I can get myself on it. Or I should have Denise go through my, you go through my bag and find it. There's nothing gonna get you in here, just be careful.
Do some shit or something.
It's like you can travel for a couple weeks with that bag.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I weighed my dog the other day at the dog whatever, and I just happened to have that, and I was like, I wonder how much that weighs, 21 pounds. Painful. So this product is like a polycarbonate. It's graffiti proof, which means it's a matte finish, and if someone were to graffiti it, it sands down back to a matte finish. It never gets shiny, it never looks different than this. It can have color implied or instilled in it, but it can also have historic photos. So at the top of the sign, and can I come over here? At the top of the sign, we've got an opportunity to put historic photos of Littleton's past, and because it's clear and it's illuminated from below, it creates this really interesting ghosted image that allows you to perceive present day and historic at the same time, which I think is really powerful. It also came from the public, that idea of having this ability to kind of use a historic photo in that way. Then on the back of the sign, we've actually got a QR code and information about that photo. So if you wanted to do a history walk that incorporated these pieces, you could, or you could just have them be standalone icons of history that tell a story about Littleton. And go ahead.
How much space is allowed for the photos? So where the cupola is up top, what size are we looking at?
Well, this is a normal 5.5-foot person.
Okay.
And so
that's the same scale for the left as well as the right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So if you kind of take, this is basically 2 feet, and it's actually almost 5 feet. No, that's not right. It's almost 4.5 feet wide. So it's a big space, and it's also a high up space, which is why we've done this kind of interpretive piece down here so you can see it properly if you want to get the information that's specific. If we put text, little interpretive text up here, you would never see it.
Where are the big ones to be and where are the small ones to be? For instance, downtown.
No, and I have a more palette coming up too. But these actually go, if you, do you know what a bulb out is? Like where the curve gets bigger at an intersection, you've got the crossings, and then you typically have a light pole that's just down from that, where it starts to neck back in. In that triangle space where it necks back in is where a sign like this goes. Because it's principally on the front an auto sign. And especially with traffic being one way in either direction, that's the way we've utilized this sign. This is the front, and this is the back. So the front is pointing you as a driver. And the reason that they're taller is because you do need that sight line, especially as you get older. To put it down low starts to compete with everything else in the visual environment. So we want to keep all of this information in a really clear So, and just to go over, I should have given you more context, I apologize. So this is the front and the back of the navigational sign for autos and peds. This is a destination sign. And so we've got one, like some of the destinations actually have sub-destinations within them, like we're in a place like that right now. Whereas others are a simple naming destination sign. And I'm going to go through, let me show you the whole palette so you get a sense of it. Then we've got this side street signage, which again has the ability to point to different businesses and has the three form in yellow at the top, and then this is a steel piece that actually indicates the street that you're on. Then the information interpretive signs are three different types. So this one's called Agricultural Beginnings. It has an interpretive panel, and this is actually in the brushed steel so that we can actually put photos and text directly onto it without the transparency. Then in places that require less real estate, we've basically got a foot-wide column, and in that column is the ability on metal panels to do photos, text, photos, overall signage naming. And then for the final one, which is more like a smaller informational sign that is also directional. So if you're down on the creek and you're looking to go downtown, this kind of information sign would say downtown shopping district, RTD station, Buck Community Recreation Center, etc. And then just to show these, most of these street signs are actually really high up on wires in the downtown. But the idea is that we're creating a palette for Littleton signs, just kind of like you see in Wheat Ridge or some of the other communities around town that have used those auto navigation street signs to actually create part of their brand. So we put the overall City of Littleton brand on the sign and then switched it from a green to a white with a black background, both for legibility but also for uniqueness, something that stands out and catches people's eye so that they know they're in Littleton. Even if they've only got the street sign to look at, it's something unique and different.
Our signs, I don't remember, do our signs currently have the 6,000 blocks south, or anything like that on them? Obviously, these don't.
They don't. I think that the overall signs, I don't know. That's a really good question. I look at signs all the time, so I know I've seen that one, but I don't know if it's for
I
Littleton
feel like
or
the
not.
downtown ones don't. I feel like the downtown ones just say
Yeah.
the name. Yeah.
That's a really, I'll
Be
look.
better than that, too.
Yeah, just,
Because I know I've seen both, and I can't recall now, so that's a really good question. But just to walk you through the overall design, this freeform material, this is a rectangular box that has the freeform inside and then a punch of steel on the outside. And so it's actually internally illuminated, so this glows at night, as does this edge, which is the same freeform but in a yellow, because Littleton's colors are black and yellow and red. So it actually glows on the side and then the top glows at night. And then because this is a box shape that actually pushes out from the sign itself, there's a band of light that pushes light onto these words at night too. So when you think about the nighttime look and feel, you've got some glow, some glow, some glow, and then some directed light onto what you need to see here. And on the back it's the same, so you get the same glow. Then the cupola at the top, because this actually sticks out, this red piece sticks out a little bit, there's a shelf on the top. So you've kind of got a shelf that historic interpretive panel rests on, and then the cupola sits out from it. So it's like a punch steel silhouette or a literal silhouette that allows you to get some depth and to draw up. We've got a lot of, this is not black, but it's almost black. And so we wanted to make sure that we get some of this material up here to bring those two halves together.
so the cupola is out from the, how far out?
It's only like 2 inches.
Just to give it a
It's
shadow,
short.
okay.
But it's meant to give it some visual depth. And also to bring some attention to this form of a cupola, because it's one of the things that people really identified strongly with in the ABC option. So we wanted to pull that through, but not too much through, because there was an equal voice that was like, the cupola is looking to the past. I'm not sure if I want it to be that prominent, although I like it as a symbol.
What's that material made out of, the cupola?
Steel, so
Steel.
it's the same. It would stand up like a steel powder coat in
Oh.
that almost black.
Is it thick or?
No.
You said it comes out 2 inches, but it's not 2 inches thick.
No, it's like 3.5 millimeters wide. It's really as thin as a sheet of steel. And we're able to make it that thin for here because it's up so high. And then as you get lower, it becomes a little bit more substantial just because I don't want people breaking it off to be like, I got the cupola, right? So you want to make it seem a little bit more sturdy. But for here, I wanted it thin because really this is some depth that's happening with the picture and the cupola coming together to be two things that you're looking at.
Are there spacers to keep it out then from the?
No, it's actually integral. It's a vent. In this case, it's just vent because this piece of steel is.
Okay, it's connected to the bottom, not, and then.
Yeah, it's not like applied, although from a manufacturing standpoint, I'm not sure if it's welded or it literally will be just a bending brake that bends it so that it stands up. I'm still working with the manufacturer because cost comes into that, so sometimes it's easier just to punch a whole bunch of these and then literally weld them together. And that's assuming we do steel because we're also still playing with cast aluminum as a potential material from a cost perspective. Trying to keep it durable but cheap.
Obviously, you're fielding questions.
Yes.
These are located in various locations. What is your power source to light it? You have to hardwire to all these locations, or you?
Yeah, we'll pull wires from, downtown with the pole lights, anywhere there's a pole light, we can easily pull power from the pole light to get to here, but they don't rely on being hardwired, and that's why I really like that material, because it doesn't necessitate being electrified to work. So it will still pass light and look really successful, even if none of these are electrified. So I personally feel like, especially as we get into some of these destination pieces, that it may not, the cost point may not make sense to electrify everything. They look cooler electrified, but it absolutely works. We actually designed it for no electrification, and then like in this step kind of went back and said, okay, if we're gonna electrify it, what would make sense with this palette? So it's a good question.
So you mentioned this polycarbonate, and then it can have color and be sanded. This is just on the surface, but is it infused with color then, or is it?
It is. It's tricky.
solid?
It looks like it's just on the surface, but it
Yeah.
isn't. It's actually the whole way through.
Okay.
It's a bit of it's a little space age. They had it out in the physical environment. It's called Chroma. The company also makes
Okay.
stuff for interiors, but the chroma stuff goes outside, and it does, like, my biggest concern was fading, so I wanted to make sure that in an environment like ours, we're not going to lose color. And they've literally had that product out in Colorado for 20 years with no color loss. So I'm very impressed with its color resiliency. You won't have the same in like powder coated steel, which every 10 years, maybe even more often, no matter how great of a powder coat you do, you're going to see this black become grayer over time.
And then if you sand this, it's still the same color.
It is. Yeah, I keep trying to get me the bigger sample, like, I don't know the size of my kitchen table, because I think it would be really cool. But it's an expensive product, which is why we've tried to use it sparingly. You can see signs made entirely out of it. It's very popular in the hospital environment for whatever reason. We see a lot of hospital signage using that as its base for the whole sign, but it's very expensive in that way because you have to buy a whole sheet and then cut out of it, and a sheet could be like $2,200, like a 6x10 piece. Signs are bigger, right? We always perceive signs as being like dinky until you're like right up next to a sign, and then you're like, it's really quite large in order to be effective.
I used to have an interstate sign, and it was humongous, but when you're driving, they look like they're
I know, it's the same. So these have to bridge that gap, and they also have to have the kind of quality that if you're, a lot of signs, like an interstate sign, you're never going to touch it. It's never going to be in your physical environment, whereas a downtown sign like this, especially on the back where we start to have walk times and destinations and a really strong map that gets people around, they're going to touch it. I mean, the quality of your community will be discerned in large part by how the materiality of this, and everything in your environment, but how it interact with it, just alludes to community, what story you're telling.
On the topic of touching, and we have a large blind community here because of the blind school. Will it have Braille on it or anything? Or?
Well, here's the rub. Like the blind community, I really wanted to accommodate them in every way. So the one way I have is that you can see some of the signs have protrusions that come out from the original palette. After digging more deeply into that group, I realized that that is a real hazard. So if you've got a cane and you're getting around and you don't, it's not low enough that it hits the edge, you can run smack into the option B, the yellow that sticks out in the pen department. But what I've heard is that they would prefer not to have a lot of accommodation. The way that they are teaching people to use the environment down here is in an accommodation-free sort of way. Now, having said that, like here on the back, it's really easy to raise Braille or punch it into the steel. I think raise works better. So I'm still pushing for that, but I've not gotten a lot of traction. So I think that that's a really, really, really good comment. And it was principle in my mind because having lived in Littleton, every time I would come up Spring Street, I would see people who were trying to get around, and I thought, oh, that looks like such a challenge. And that's our narrow sidewalks. There are. But as it turns out, like there's a reason for the challenges that they actually look at.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I'm not like that though. I'm like, let's make it easier for everybody. So I'm still working through, and there's one more person that I'd really like to talk to at that place, and I haven't reached them back. So I think that that's still on the table.
You can always add it later too. I know a lot of elevators have just a plate of Braille that they adhere, maybe the same color even.
Yeah, it would be very easy to adhere anything to this material because it's so easy to bolt into in the big panels like this. But the way we've approached it is actually still, screening onto rather than creating dimensional lettering.
So it could be changed.
Yeah, that was part of it, right? A lot of these destinations, though, are not going to change. City complex, RTD. When you're looking at a sign like this, we can't sign for like the pottery place, which is like awesome, but like from a civic standpoint, that's why we created the signage that's allows for them to buy this metal piece so that they can point. And I've shown these as individual, but you could also buy like to have a bigger graphic. And then this is a mesh, and so it's a little bit transparent, and then you can put something on the back as well, so you can point from both areas. Okay, so I have some next steps, but does anybody else have questions? You can ask questions at the end too, but since we're dialoguing.
The bigger pieces, do you have another slide on option D for those, or are they gone?
Oh no, they're certainly not gone, but we're actually meeting this Friday with staff to show the first draft of ideas. That was our most challenging part of the project. Well, because it's expensive and it's critical. I mean, those gateways are the smile that greets your visitors and your residents.
Well, today's chic could be, tomorrow's what were they thinking? So,
yeah.
I think a couple of these examples might fall into that category someday.
Well, yeah, I have to tell you, so a funny story is a lot of people felt that this kinetic sculpture was like a solar panel. They were like, I hate the solar panel. It's like, yeah, and that's just the struggle. I should have made a model. And honestly, when we're leaning toward art pieces for this gateway, which some of them we really are leaning toward art pieces, the way that we would progress that forward after the project is create maquettes. Like put an RFP basically out to artists. Those artists create little miniature versions of what they would look like, and then you go and you vote. So it's both a gateway piece and an art piece at the same time. It's not necessarily public art, but it would go through that same kind of a maquette process so that you could get a little, better than this as far as a flat image. Okay. You can ask, do you have one more question?
Sure.
Go ahead. I'll stand. I feel bad that I'm away from the microphone. So.
We can hear you.
I'm good talker. I'm loud. Ooh, I really am.
You don't need the mic.
Sorry.
No.
I really don't, actually.
The street name signs, are they standard size? They look out of proportion with the pole.
They're a little bit bigger, but they're the new standard size.
Oh.
So that kind of kerning, which is like the space between letters and the space around letters, I am going to make that. The idea is that they're a little bit bigger and that there's a little bit, it's hard to tell, but there's a little bit less space in between the letters too. They're just slightly smushed.
Like the one on B, South Prince, just sticks out so far, but that's not going to be using. But I was just curious if it's based on a standard sign size.
It is, and I will say that the PowerPoint format is smushing my slide a little bit too. Like this is a proper circle in real life.
Oh, okay.
And so you're getting a little bit of, now that I'm looking at it.
So they're actually bigger.
Bigger. They're even
Are they
bigger.
wind resistant?
Okay, yeah, so here's the thing, like we have an option where we don't say Littleton and we just have the mark instead of Littleton.
Yeah.
And I think we've discerned that that is legal, because for a while we were like, is that illegal from a brand standard standpoint to have those two things divorced from each other? And apparently it isn't. So I apologize, because I think the Littleton's going away, which means it'll be a Lush, depending on the name of the street. But we'll go with standard abbreviations too, so it'll be like S period Prince more than likely. Because I wanted to make sure we spelled it out for the most part here, but the standard is you abbreviate wherever possible in the street signs.
Some cities are looking at parking signs and trying to come up with a much better design, and we have them spread all over our community that are very confusing.
Yes.
Don't park, or between these hours you have 2-hour parking. It seems like it'd be nice to roll that in as well.
Yes. We don't have that here, but it's in our booklet that we're producing as the final booklet. So
Okay.
two things. One, recommendations, gentle recommendations that we may want to reduce the number of parking signs. Like at a minimum, you really only need one at each end saying 2 hours here, right? You don't need one in front of every stall. And you're almost at a place where you've got one in front of every stall. And that absolutely is defensible. I mean, one of the concerns if you don't have enough parking signs is if someone says, look, I had no idea this was 2-hour parking. But everywhere throughout Colorado, you've got 2 hours in pointing, right? So I think we could easily go there. And then if you look at, if you've been to a new shopping mall, like Orchard Town Center is the example that I usually use, because Streets at Southland I don't think does this, but I know that Orchard does, and I know that Northfield and Stapleton does. They've actually taken those regulatory signs and dressed them up a bit. So they're on a proper pole. They usually have like a color coat in the back. So the back either has like it's not just that silver, but it's colored to the pole, or they've done like a screen of a graphic. So if you've got a flat back, you could do a screen of like a cupola on the back of it. And that's again, we need to present that to staff, but it's in the works as far as organizing those signs so that they look like part of a cohesive whole.
Right.
And also kind of recommending that you don't maybe need all of them.
Yeah. Maybe Charlie likes to mark the space with the signs.
I really like Charlie.
Of course.
He's hard not to like, right? But we did talk about, there's a lot of parking signs, and I think just bringing it to his attention that, like, there are other places where they just point was really, really helpful. But, he's in the business of, like, if someone complains or says whatever, it's on him.
Yep.
So that's why it was so important to get, like, that staff perspective of what do they do now, what's working, what's driving how the physical environment looks right now. Everything from signs to, like, rock mulch to where benches are placed, all of that.
Two things. One, relating to this comment, I heard, I think when I first started here, I heard some complaints about parking and how people are complaining because there's no parking in downtown Littleton because they can no longer park directly in front of the business they want to visit. When in fact there's plenty of parking. It's just a perspective thing where it's changing. Maybe there's not as much parking because there's more demand for parking in downtown. But so, I would say complaints, some of them can fall on deaf ears. But
No, parking's it's always a problem in downtowns. It's a real problem and it's a perceived problem. So in Littleton, it's a real problem because you have a lot of RTD commuters. And the way that they're using downtown space is like, for all-day parking so that they can use the light rail for commuting. And you'll see that more on the east side of town, across the railroad tracks into the neighborhoods. So one of the things that we really heard when we did the Stern Park meet and greet, for people that were talking about parking, they were saying, look, I live here around this park, and I find that people will park here all day long in front of my house because they're using light rail. So they'll park and then they'll walk. So that pressure of, having the benefit of light rail weighed with the need to park for it and the desire, the increasing desire of, especially the younger, like I'm in my 40s, but like younger 20s, 30s, teens really use when you look at the demographics of who's using public transit, that age group is like eclipsing us in great numbers. And so they're very interested in transit. They look at Littleton as a place to live because it has really great RTD access, both bus and light rail. So you're going to see that pressure continue. So it's a real problem, but it's also a perceived problem insofar as that when people are driving, they want to see empty spaces, or they want to see where they can go to find, maybe if you can't find on Main Street, one of the merchants coined the Littleton Loop. Like, do the Littleton Loop, and where does that loop take you? And where does it help you find parking that's not visible, like right in front of a business, but is really visible in other areas? And some businesses have lots, but very few. And the businesses that do have lots tend to be destination businesses that get a call, and a customer's coming, and they have that opportunity to say, here's where you park, here's how you get to me. Whereas most businesses are relying on foot traffic or new business and new destinations. They have to rely on the physical environment to help people find their way around. So that parking piece, there are parking lots available. They're shared with RTD or with this facility, but they're very walkable, and it's just making them, when we look at that map piece, one of the things that we're noting more than anything else is like, where do you park? And these little arrows can point to parking too. This is just a typical sign, but if you remember my graphic with 1,000,000 dots, some of those dots are specifically signage that helps point to parking so that people feel like it's available, because that's the perceived piece. Is it not available? I'm worried it will be the thing that keeps me from coming to downtown Littleton because I feel like I can't find a place to park. But I don't want to diminish it because it is a real problem too. We do have a lot more, like for years and years I lived in Littleton and I watched it go up from, you used to be able to find parking spots downtown like 8 years ago, 9 years ago. No trouble, but now a lot more challenging.
And then the other thing was on the street signs. Are these other street signs off the table, or is it still? Do you have that one there?
Yeah, I always say So I always say toward the end of the project, I was not emotionally attached to A, B, or C, right? And then you start designy, right? And you start getting emotionally attached. But I will say I'm not emotionally attached to the street signs. And, we've kind of, as a working group with staff, I don't think anybody's like, that's definitely the street sign that we want. So if there's some consensus or some desire for us to kind of drawing table that more, I'm a designer, so the drawing table part's the fun part for me.
Well, you talked about the Littleton going away and just having the L.
Yeah.
You've got that one there that's a little more stylistic. It still looks like an L in the middle.
Yep.
It does. It's probably a little more expensive because it does go above the sign.
No, it's absolutely fabulous, but it's a no-no from a brand standard. Because I kind of take the stamp and sort of use it and don't use it at the same time. Yeah. I love that one.
Okay, so emotional attachment, that one was my absolute favorite. But it's out of the picture as far as.
What about the other one, the cupola one? Or having a
Cupola ones, definitely.
Or you could even combine the cupola one with the L.
And then I'd be in real big trouble.
A ship has sailed, David.
The benefit of having this brand stamp is that you can apply that beyond downtown.
Mhm.
It stands for Littleton. Like, we were trying to create something that was very downtown for this process, but realized very quickly that that piece, that sign piece, could move beyond and really be a community image maker, in which case the cupola is not really appropriate because it's downtown.
Well, yeah, but you could add the cupola to the downtown sign.
Oh, sure.
And then take them off for the other signs. Then you'd have continuity, but then you'd have a little differentiation.
You know, you probably could. You probably could.
I'm sorry, did you design the logo, the Littleton logo, or was that done before you got here?
It was done
That's-
before I got here.
So you're sort of having to work it in, so to speak.
Yes, definitely.
With what you were given.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a brand standard. So there's the brand, but then there's like a book that tells you how you can use it.
Right, no, I understand all
It's not
that. I
like the
just,
sign behind
you
you.
didn't have any input on that part, and yet here you were given all the.
No, and I've heard
Parts to
everything
deal
about it.
with.
It's like love, hate. I mean,
Right.
you know, it's integral. Like, it comes up as part of my process.
Well, you have to deal with it. It's part of Littleton now.
But, you know, I will say this, it is iconic and everybody knows it.
Well,
right?
if they
So-
don't now, they will soon, right?
Yes, but the idea is, you know, downtown is part of Littleton, but it needs, like, all of this palette kind of needed to have its own sense of stuff.
Yes.
And not, you know, you don't want to dilute. The Main Street is really the heart of your community. It's where you tell your stories, it's where you welcome visitors, it's where people tend to bring anybody who's visiting
Yeah.
to, you know, here, we're here now.
It's the identity,
Mm.
for sure.
And so you want to be really judicious about how
Yeah.
far you spread that out. I think the football and some contiguous stuff is as far as you want to go with that downtown brand.
So this is strictly for downtown, but are the big ones potentially gateways that could be on Broadway?
Right. So donut shop and gas station, that kind of bridges the gap. Right, it's a little bit more downtown Littleton, and that has come up because we've also talked about, like, well, gee, there are these other really big gateways in town. Could we kind of take these ideas that are more like gateway at the ends of the football and apply them to gateways in other areas, like at the intersection of Dry Creek and Broadway. There's a really big one by a car dealership. So thinking about how we want to bring it out. But that kind of, you know, it sort of like bubbled out from a scope standpoint, but I think that's a really good point, and everyone else has brought that up too. So the unique one, the one that we want to make sure looks like downtown, is at the east and west, unique ones. So if you think about the gateway on the west, which is the Santa Fe Gateway, and then on the east, like on the other side of the railroad tracks, and the bridges themselves are also important gateway features, so kind of dressing those up is part of our process too, to give you some ideas for how the bridges could be iconic gateway pieces. But you've got an art piece already in the planter there, A Year of Sundays, it's like a bronze. And so we've pretty much looked at keeping that. We could also move it though too. I don't think that's necessarily off the table. Those are hard to move though. They're spendy. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm sketching away here, I got some.
Oh, design, yeah, I love it. Well, yeah, I should out you as far as like the picture piece of like, how can you make it look, that was
Why don't you move the L's called the stylized L to the outside edges and stamp it out so that it pops out, so it's scalloped underneath, something like that. Might pop it out a little bit.
I like that idea too.
And
Or a
then
cutout even. Could you do a cutout?
they cut it out,
Yeah.
especially at the bottom part especially,
Yeah,
just kind of,
yeah, the
Follow.
vertical element could be just black on the edge of the sign.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And then the red and yellow could kind of come down. And
Oh, I like
What
that
I'm saying.
idea.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could get away with that.
I'm sure we could, because it's.
Well, you haven't tilted
It's-
me now.
That's right.
I haven't tilted it, I haven't changed it too much. I really like that idea because it maximizes the real estate better, and it also kind of allows your eye to get to the middle for the.
Yeah, so just paste it on, it's part of the sign itself.
Yeah, kind of like that, but the L and move to the outside.
No, I love it. I'll try that option.
Yeah.
No, it's good. Like I said, I'm not emotionally attached or offended. The best ideas, I'm just like the conduit. I mean, literally, when you talk to a community, that's where your ideas come from. Then you take your design mind and everything that you know and you just meld them together, right? So it's not like I sat in my ivory tower of design and came up with all of this. It's like a lot of these good ideas came directly from talking to other people.
Also with it'd be nice to have some braces, some kind of slight brace or something right as it hits the pole. And give it an old, the Victorian braces at the porch.
Yes, I do.
One on each side just to give it a little, to blend this, meld it into vertical.
I like that, although they're rarely going to be on a pole like that. Most of the signs are hanging, right?
Well then. Yeah.
I know. It's deceptive because from a scale perspective, there was like no way to show those except on like a light pole, but they don't exist on light poles. Sorry, from a design perspective. My bad. Does anybody else I have just like 2 more slides to show you where we're going.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we're creating that gateway, secondary, tertiary sign palette. And then we're having additional one-on-one merchant meetings till the end of this month. I know that I have at least 2 more that I'm scheduled to complete. We did the downtown walking tour, the technical assistance team meeting. The final city council presentation will be in July. And then I have to follow back with South Suburban, ACC, and that second touch with the Colorado Center for the Blind. And then the final document will include the locations, the cost estimate, this documentation of process that we've gone through, and then the complete signage and wayfinding palette, and then the implementation, maintenance strategies, and schedule. So the most important pieces in the next month are really getting to the cost estimate, which includes that maintenance strategy and schedule piece. Sorry. And then making sure that we have the complete palette. So as we go through this process, every one of those little dots in a booklet gets a sign, and this is what is on that sign, right? So here's the dot, they're all numbered and keyed, and that's a pretty hefty booklet. But as you can see, we've got other booklets that have been done. We've got a nice palette for that, so the whole package will come together, I think, really nicely. Okay, that's all I've got.
All right, thank you.
Thank you
Questions?
very much.
How much is it gonna cost?
That's a good question, right? So typically, like when I costed these, the larger signs are like, oh, well, these are gateways. So gateways really range because if you're talking like public art versus a sign, this could be like $40,000, $50,000, just depending on like how grand you get with art and how much the artist charges, and there's an and.
Yeah.
So that, we really have to narrow that down to get better pricing on gateways, which we've not done yet. But like a sign like this is like an 8 to 12, right? So across the board, they kind of range in that area. This was the most inexpensive. This was the most expensive. And this was right in the middle.
You said 8 to 12?
8
as
to
in
12.
100 each? 8?
Yes, 8,000 to 12,000.
Oh, 8. No, left out a 0. 8. Thank you.
No, that's good. Put a K after. And then they go down, like 4 to 6 maybe, depending. Electricity ups the price. So when we go into the cost estimate, like that sign package where we've got the very specific, this is that sign, this is what this sign costs. And then when you look at an overall signage package for a town like Littleton, it typically goes like to install everything between like $250,000 to $350,000. From an urban design standpoint, that's a fairly inexpensive project if you talk about like streets or furnishings or anything like that. But it's always, I feel, just information. I always get embarrassed when I have to say what stuff costs. I don't know why. But that's what it'll be right around that much.
Has the city given you a target number?
They've given me the instructions to make sure that I show that it could be phased. But we haven't talked numbers, but it's probably because I've not been terribly disclosive. I think I've given them the general number, but no one said no yet, so I've just kind of kept going along that path. But the idea is that you'd want to parcel it out in a way that is reasonable. These are easy to install. They don't involve the construction disruptions that like a streetscape project would, or anything that goes into the roadway. It doesn't impact businesses in the way a big project like that would. So they can go up pretty discreetly. In that way, they're very easily phased. So I would recommend phasing, because I think it's a nice way to keep costs over a 3-year period. And usually I like a 3-year period, because when you're old like me, 3 years goes fast. For my 11-year-old, 3 years is like, oh! But I think it's a nice way to kind of get people used to the palette, mostly what we see is people start getting excited, like when's my sign going to come? And we'll definitely see that with particularly those side street, Alamo Street merchants that are hopeful to have something that is official and approved that can point to their shop.
I think your new design's fabulous. It's really good.
It's very
Really
nice.
good. It really does blend sort of the best of all worlds.
Oh, I'm glad that you
Yeah.
think so, because it is a little, sometimes hard to just put it
And
out
when
there.
I'm sure when you're so immersed in it too, you kind of go cross-eyed after a while, but I think I was pleasantly surprised when you flipped that page to that.
Oh.
I thought it was wonderful.
Well, and I'm not averse to criticism too, so is anybody like, I want to see something different, or?
I think you also had some hard parameters you're working with, sort of the, sorry for my lack of decorum, but McDonald's coloring with the red and the yellow.
You're not the first person
And
to
so,
say that.
you know, you've worked that in really well in a classy way, you know.
Yes, we definitely heard, not, like, love the colors, but like, that's a lot of color. And so we really pulled back, and that's why, as opposed to a color for the 3-form, I really felt like keeping it clear and using those historic photos to tell the story,
Yeah.
so much more successful. And the color has a better balance between, I think, the black and the color. I'm happy with that too. I was fine with these, but like once it came together in this way, I was much more happy.
But that color there, is it purposefully more maroon than some of the other colors?
No, it's red. I think it's just the interplay of the like 90% gray with it that makes it skew maroon, but it's as red as the sample. It's red.
Oh, so there's some.
Redder, actually, but that sample's not as red.
Yeah, I understand.
Littleton's red is a very true, like, it's a very clean Pantone, like, it's a red.
McDonald's.
It went primary, red and yellow.
Yeah, McDonald's red is actually less red than
Is it?
Littleton's red.
Yeah, like that, now that you say that, I don't like that gateway sign anymore.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, art is, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
I'm eager to actually get to a place where we start with staff and get into those gateway pieces, because
Yeah.
they're pretty significant, and they've been the most challenging and fun to design.
I think it's a very clean design. The most important part of a sign is what's on the sign, the information. It's a clean look. It doesn't compete with the information they're really trying to find. And the town itself, the architecture, the character provides the historic context. The sign just kind of hints at it. It doesn't have to compete with the building itself. And simple is also sometimes more economical, so
Absolutely.
that helps too. So it's very, very well done.
2 points for me is, one, I tried for the longest time to like version A, but it was so it was stodgy, but it was the only one that had tried to get its hands around Littleton.
Yes.
The others are just generic. This, at least one tried to be Littleton.
Yes,
Which is
I
what
heard
we're
that.
always trying to get our hands around, is what makes Littleton Littleton? How can we incorporate that in architecture and design and everything in the
Yes.
city? So this one is a pleasant surprise. I like what you're doing here. One other comment is the photos, if one of these big monuments is going on one of the streets furthest west, try to get a photo on that was taken in that area 100 years ago, put it up there so somebody can look up, see that picture,
Yep.
and then look out and see what it looks like today. That brings history alive.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so try not to put whatever, the original McDonald's photo
No, make
there.
it contextual, so
Sure.
that you could, yeah, if you and I think it was
Yes,
you
I
that
will.
came up, and I was like, that is a brilliant idea. So this is trying to achieve that, which is, yeah, like you can kind of look at the street and then you can look at the street. And the same way that you can look at a building and then look at the building, so that you've got that tie, and they're not randomly placed.
Actually, 3 or 4 times, I'd love it to have one of those big guys just in nothing but photo, really, and take it and put in the exact location of where that photo was taken 100 years ago.
So it's like transparent.
It's just boom and whoa, oh, look what happened.
Well, I think that's kind of a cool thing. I don't see why we can't do that.
Just,
I'll just put that out there.
it's just,
'Cause I
well,
think
if
it's-
$1,200 rather than 12,000, go ahead and put a couple in.
Okay, I hear you, yeah. Yeah, well, it's a neat process the way they put the photos in that material too. Like, it really creates some interesting depth and shadow. And I think they'll look really neat illuminated as well. So even though they don't require that to sort of glow it up, the edge light's really nice on that material. So it actually, the light kind of gravitates to the edge and then it creates like a glowing edge. So the top, this part will actually have a bit of a glow, and that's how this is working too, is that the edge kind of glows.
So I have a comment, you said earlier about bike riding, how you want to attract people to get to downtown.
Yeah.
Part of signage does help that. And this is a good first step, is to identify where things are. I think Littleton's other challenge is the barrier to get to downtown on a bike.
Yes.
Santa Fe, I'm a biker, I ride flat all the time. But I don't come to downtown even though I live here because it's too hard to get here on a bike. To cross Santa Fe is like, death trap. And so you just go further down to places that are right off of the path, easy to get off your bike and get back on the path. And so our next challenge, and something we are already working towards, is trying to make that connection across Santa Fe with development on the other side,
Yeah.
and that somehow we can make Santa Fe not as wide mentally. It won't be physically, but it will be easier to cross. Even Prince Crossing is easier than the Mineral Cross, the Littleton Boulevard Crossing.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
You do have the Little's Creek Trail, I just saw.
Yeah.
to come under,
Yeah, the sweet spot is you've
Yeah.
got Mary Carter, right, which is like the Platte River Trail.
right?
So right south of the old shopping mall,
Echo Star.
Echo Star, I always forget the name of it, thank you. There is a connection. There's Little's Creek Trail. There's no sign. So if you're a biker,
Well, that's
like-
one thing, I've never seen a sign.
right, to tell people,
Yeah.
hey, downtown shopping district,
Yeah.
this away. And
Yeah.
then you've got Rapp and Curtis and Prince as connections for that Little's Creek Trail to draw you up. And if you're a biker like me, you'd rather go up like Rapp or Curtis, because Prince, you're right in the throes of traffic. And so at those places, we put signs that say, go this way, right, to get to downtown. Because I'm a scaredy cat biker. I'm not a brave biker. Like, I'm not gonna go down a bike trail that doesn't tell me at the decision-making point what I'm getting into. I'm not exploratory because I'm out of shape. So I'm worried that I'm gonna like go off into the never world and never get back. So in that way, like the signage has been designed for that kind of user, not the like hardcore biker who's out to explore and that's part of the joy of it. It's like a family of bikers and here's how we get to downtown in the safest, easiest way. Not crossing across Santa Fe Because until improvements come in that would make crossing easier, you're really looking at a challenge. Like the bike path now takes you out Prince and you cross Santa Fe at the northern gateway. And
You go to the donut shop up there.
right.
That's why you bike, is to buy donuts.
You do. In fact, the one biking thing I did where I was going to go to the donut shop, I missed they closed really early, FYI. And I missed the donuts. So I was really put out. But anyway, that's the way you cross, but that has its challenges. And actually a lot of people walk that crosswalk too.
Yeah.
I worry over it, especially with the right hand turn. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. How much time do you need?
I'll take whatever you want to
15 minutes.
Are there any other questions?
It's a board, we could cut off.
Very good presentation.
Thanks for the questions.
And unless anybody has any more questions, I want to thank you for being here.
No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to fill this out. Is that okay? And I'm going to quietly take these down.
Sure.
If
Well,
it's too
do what you have
disruptive,
to do.
just be like, knock it off.
2-minute break if you want some water. I'm going to show you that.
Yes. I know. And I also just like cutting it out. It's really hot. I love it.
You know, for the artist, Vicky Lynn, who is a good friend of ours, lives in Aberdeen, she designed the mural.
Oh, she did.
She would make a
Sorry, this is hot.
wonderful, I'm going to tell her about the competition. She would do a fantastic job, and she's a little bit obviously.
Right, so then
She knows that it means something in talks with it.
Okay, now the fun begins. What I thought I'd do is just take advantage of the lull in activity to just talk about zoning 101, I guess. You've seen some of these projects. So I'm putting it in the form of anybody who's taken introduction to psychology knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Everything I remember from psychology.
You remember that? See, it's all coming back. The very bottom is your basic eat and notice it has excrete on here, so those are very important functions. And then up at the top is when you actually reach your self-actualization and you understand morality, creativity, spontaneity, and problem solving. And this kind of goes back, or it does go back to Abraham, who took a different tack with studying psychology. He studied the super bright people and the people that were high achieving because he thought it was a waste to spend time studying those that were dysfunctional. So that's kind of where his theory came from. So I borrowed that a little bit and flipped it over. And so I want to talk a little bit about discretion in zoning and development cases. And I've kind of geared it towards the planning board, but you could think of this as the city council as well. You're making a recommendation to the city council on certain things. And this is where they have the discretion. So in the zoning world, we have planned developments, and that's kind of the top. I put the base because it was a wide area, it was much bigger area, so meaning you have a lot of discretion. You can make a lot of conditions on that PD in the areas of public improvements, and we've done this in the past. Street improvements, traffic lights, sidewalks, bike paths, open space connections, all those you have the flexibility with, I guess, the developer's concurrence to put those conditions in a planned development. You can also limit height, all the bulk requirements, floor area ratio, increase setbacks, increase landscaping, increase buffers. You have all that flexibility in the planned development districts. So kind of keep that in mind as we bring these forward to you. If you see something you don't like, you have a lot of discretion in recommending a change to it. Then you step down and you actually have final word on plan development overlays. They sound the same, but they're very different, and I'll get into the detail with that. Conditional use approval, I don't know that we've had one recently. And then I also threw in here for Historic Preservation Board, they're responsible for certificate of appropriateness. How do we create a change in architecture within a historic district so that it's appropriate to that district? And then we move down to more traditional zoning. That's basically somebody wants to change a B2 to an R5. It's a much more simpler decision, and you really don't have discretion in those cases. Your answer is, or you're being asked to say yes or no. And so the discretion comes down. Then you have how you're actually implementing that zoning. And the planning board sees that in the form of a preliminary plat. The council sees it in a major subdivision or a final plat, and then staff does the minor subdivision plats. We have subdivision improvement agreements. I should actually, it would be confusing, but I could slide that up a little bit because that's where you're negotiating with the developer on all those public improvements with a project. So if they agree, then, and it becomes part of the agreement, then basically it has the force of law. And then site development plans, which is really a staff function. And I'll go through an example on each one of these. So you remember Littleton Village. This was one of the exhibits. It was a conceptual, illustrative plan of what the build-out might look like. You were really looking at the west half of this project. The east half had already been approved as far as zoning, and they weren't asking for any adjustment there, just in the commercial adjustment. So as you know, they had a lot of conditions on this. So here's what you can do as far as plan development zoning. You can do anything as far as the development standards, but allow greater heights, allow shorter heights, setbacks, bulk requirements, which is your floor area ratio. That's the amount of building square footage in relation to the size of the site. You can put in landscape buffers. You can dictate architectural design, require greater amounts of open space, higher densities, lower densities, and then public improvements are all those things, street improvements, widening streets. Maybe we're actually narrowing some streets in some cases if you want to create more of a complete street or reduce traffic in some cases. Sidewalks, traffic lights. Now I do say that there should be a rational nexus or an agreement with the developer. So you couldn't necessarily with Littleton Village say, go down and rebuild Mineral and Broadway Road intersection. I don't think we could find a rational nexus between their project and doing that improvement. So there is some limitations, and then your decisions, you have to base them on the comprehensive plan. Certainly we have public hearings, so citizen input will be a part of that. This was actually originally presented to council, so I've said your recommendation and then staff's recommendation. All those are the reasons for your decision. And that's how we ended up with Littleton Village. And this is only one page, and you can see we have 15 pages of all those standards tied to that plan development. Here's another page that gets into more of the urban design and the open space requirements. So there's a lot of pros that go with plan development. In fact, I think through my career, that's something I've always pushed. Now, there is starting to be kind of a movement away from plan developments. Most recently, City of Lakewood has adopted a whole new zoning code where they de-emphasize the plan developments. And in fact, they put underlying zoning with the plan development, so they're not a unique element anymore. And what they found is similar to what we have on a much smaller scale. These are kind of a point in time. So you come up with your best ideas, and they're developing Littleton Village. You'll start seeing preliminary plats here real quickly on the project. But then we also have the Enzer plan development down at Mineral and Santa Fe. It's been in place over 30 years. And try and understand what that plan development means. It's very difficult. So there's some drawbacks to plan development is they can almost be too specific to the point of where you're always amending them. That's something to keep in mind with plan developments. And then, so I put it as medium high. So the things that you are the final word on, plan development overlays. That's like a plan development light, if you will. You can't put as many conditions on. The whole idea with a plan development overlay is we can meet the basics of the zoning code where we're at, but we want some more flexibility to get a little bit better development. So that means all those bulk requirements you have flexibility on, height, setbacks, not really density to a certain effect, and you can't touch the uses. So you can restrict the allowed uses, but you can't add additional land uses.
We can't restrict the usages, but for the overlay, we can get into bulk architecture, et cetera.
Architecture and design is not one of the listed things.
Okay. But bulk setbacks, et cetera, are on the table?
Right. And well, I'll show you it. Here's an example. And I mentioned uses. So you can't add uses, but you can take them away with a plan development overlay. And that's just what we did with Breckenridge Brewery. We put the I-1 zoning in place. There were some uses we didn't really think was appropriate in that neighborhood. So we really limited it to the brewery and accessory uses. So you did that with a plan development overlay. And then going back, so conditional uses are those things that are allowed uses, but they have to go through a public hearing and be approved by the planning board. And the one we see the most is daycare, and ironically, prisons is another use that requires a conditional use. So they have the appropriate zoning, but before they can actually take occupancy, they come before you and they say, here's our impacts, and you have the opportunity, you have the discretion of putting conditions on it. There's some lawyers will argue whether you can approve it or deny it. I've always been told it's not your purview to deny a conditional use. It's your job to put conditions on it so that it's appropriate where it is. And that can be hours of use. We've done that before. Lighting, noise. Usually it's about making a use fit into an existing neighborhood. So those are conditional uses. And then HPB. So they're charged with somebody wants to do an addition to a building on Main Street. They have two levels of design orientation. One is they are adding to the design theme. It's a building that is adding to the design theme, or one that's perhaps detracting from the Main Street district. So they have more discretion to redesign a building that is non-contributing, they call it, than they do with a contributing structure. And they have very detailed design guidelines that they follow to do that. And that's only the architecture of the building. And then on all these cases, again, we use comprehensive plan, input from the neighborhood, design guidelines, and of course, your staff recommendation. So here's an example of Delizio's. That was a certificate of appropriateness a year or so ago. You wouldn't know here, but it was the covered patio. This was a contributing structure to the Main Street district because it was one of the first gas stations. This was actually a part of Route 66. So feeling was an important part. And it was decided that this should be a contributing structure to the main street. They wanted to put a canopy over the outside patio, and then the bottom right-hand corner picture is basically a plastic roll-down sheet so they can enclose it in the winter and potentially heat it. In this case, the HPB recommended against it, or actually denied it, because their feeling was, because it was a gas station and that's why it was contributing to the downtown, those two front windows were drive-in bays, and those needed to be uncovered. They felt that should be a dominant part of the architecture, and the canopy or the patio cover detracted from that. So in this case, they recommended, or really they actually denied it. By our code, the applicant has an opportunity to appeal that. He did appeal it to the city council, and the city council overturned it. But here's an example of what the HPB does. So much more detailed. And then you get to the medium point, which is traditional zoning. You're basically changing a district. And so you're being asked yes or no. And now you can also, if somebody, for instance, wants R5 zoning, you can recommend a lesser district to city council. So if, but you can't go the other way. So you can recommend a lower intensity district, but not a higher intensity district. So that's where you're really limited from a discretion standpoint. And then the development standards and the public improvement requirements, they're what's in the zoning code and the subdivision code. We can't wander past that. So you can't ask a developer who wants a straight zoning change to widen the street in front of the project. If the zoning code or the subdivision code doesn't dictate, then they don't necessarily have to do that. Yes, sir.
Where does variance come in?
Oh, good one. Geez, I didn't put variance in here. So, dang it. So then we have the Board of Adjustment, who has the right to vary on a specific piece of property a bulk standard for the zoning code. So I brought some. So this is the zoning code. All the standards are written here. And if somebody is required to put a 20-foot setback, and they have a house and they have it's in a historic district, and part of the historic district is historic landscape. So some of the cases we see at HPB is we don't want to remove this historic tree that's been here for 75 years in front of this house. So we want to have a shift in the setback in order to retain a tree. And that's something that the Board of Adjustment does.
Have you had one recently?
Yes, we had actually 4 come up on agenda, 4 different variances. One had to do with a sign, so they'll also deal with the sign code.
All in the downtown area, though, or were they outside?
2 of them were in the downtown area, yeah. And one had to do with somebody who was adding a handicap ramp to their property. And in order to do that, the structure had to actually come into a setback. So the board in those cases, I think, approved all of those. And they're under a real stringent standard. It can't be something you just want to do. There has to be something unique about that property that keeps them from meeting the zoning standards. So
I heard that you said there was a sign that was approved. Sign.
I'm trying to think what I think it had more to do with the geometry of the sign. So it wasn't bigger, it was allowing more of a flexible design on it. I don't remember the details.
There was a height restriction. There was a height restriction and the sign was.
So they were allowed to go higher?
They wanted to go higher, but they needed to do.
It was on the freeway, right? Was it on the C470?
Yes.
So it was maybe due to a change in grade?
Right.
So there was a kind of a physical issue with the site itself. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't even talk about HPB.
We always try to get them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you talked about the, allowing us to recommend a less intensive use but not higher, you were talking about the PDO, right?
Yeah.
But when that's recommended and approved and in use, can you then later dissolve that PDO, going back to that base use later?
No.
So if you're on a less intensive use, you could recommend going back to the higher level use as long as it doesn't go above where you started, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
Let me see, maybe. So what I put together is a theoretical case here. This is the Nordgren property and the commercial property that is zoned IP and B2. And let's just say, and I don't even know if you can do a CA outside the downtown, but let's say somebody wants to build a high-rise here. So they rezone the IP and the B2 to CA. That's the request. So you could approve that request, or you could say, no, I think B2 is appropriate, and let's just change the Nordgren site or the IP to B2. Or I guess I think what you're saying is potentially you could say, okay, but we want some restrictions on that CA. We're not comfortable giving you the gamut of height.
Yeah.
In which case you could say, we want you to do a PDO, go away, come back, and bring forward, a restricted zone case.
Yeah, and I was thinking more of in the future, another planning board, say, then once somebody comes and says, we want to remove the CA and go back, can you?
Sure, they can always do that. They can always request that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just mean going back to that base level of where you were.
There's no guarantee they'll go back, depending on the
Right.
Just that
circumstances around.
all I mean is the planning board has the purview to approve something like that, going back to a higher intensive use,
Down
even
zoning it.
though,
Yes.
yeah, because that's where it started, is what
Right.
I'm thinking of, yeah. Okay.
And you still have to go through the process. Even if
Right.
you're going down in intensity, you still have to go through the public hearing process to downzone it. And some cases, you might not want to downzone it. It might be an intense intersection and you want intense uses there. And somebody may want to do residential. We've certainly seen those cases, right? Where it's a commercial zoning and somebody wants to do residential.
By the way, you might reiterate that we are advisory to council on rezoning.
On rezonings, yes, you are. Yes, you are. The PDO, conditional use, you have final word, and preliminary plat, you have final word. So, so I guess typically it's been kind of a feeling that this is not the direction most cities want to go because you don't have that level of discretion that you have with planned developments. But more and more cities are rewriting their code, and I think I wouldn't have as big a hesitation if I knew our zoning code wasn't written 40 years ago. So with a rewritten code and something that's up to date, this may be more of a future request. It's certainly a simpler question. The other advantage is I think residents understand this a little bit better than a 15-page plan development. That's sometimes pretty hard to get through and actually understand what the heck's going to get built here. When you have this and you can read it in the code, it's a little bit simpler. Some cities are doing what's called now form-based zoning, whereas it's not just the standards, it really gets into the design of the building. So what they'll do is they'll back off the allowed uses if they, and they dictate the design of the structure that the use has to be in. So the feeling is if it fits within the context of the neighborhood and it's appropriate architecture, and you know what the impacts of the use is, do you really care that much whether it's an office or a retail or a daycare within the confines of the building? But we are seeing other cities kind of, maybe not overall the whole community, but maybe in special districts, doing more of a form-based zoning.
I come across PDOs or PDs or ODPs or whatever. They're all different terms in different cities where they write their, like Littleton Village, they write their own code for that development. But then you start getting into designing for that development based upon that code. And not every situation is addressed. And so the question then becomes, as the professional, then what do I use as a standard? Usually you say, well, you got to go back to the original city code and see if but usually you have to go back and say, if it's not stated, then we have to fall back upon what the city minimum code is.
Yeah.
And that's where the confusion comes in with writing your own code, is you don't always catch everything.
Right.
Or they leave things on purpose.
Yeah.
Because they want flexibility to do what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And so where you have form-based code or a more modern code, stick with traditional zoning, don't get into the confusion of changing this and that, you know what it is. So you can follow it. You may have a few variances, but
Yeah.
It does get confusing when you have two different sets of standards, city and a custom code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly, we sat down with the folks in Lakewood who went through a 3-year process. They rewrote their code, and that was one of the issues they wanted to address and it's just like us. We have a plan development, and it's a custom-written district for that property. If it's 30 years old, and what you want to do would be a great use there and fits it, but it doesn't meet the written standards, you're out of luck. You got to go back and rezone. And what they did when they implemented their new code is they put underlining zoning districts on those PDs. So if you did run into a conflict, you'd go back to the zoning code, and that would be what dictates the use. It's kind of an interesting thing.
So they're totally overlays now?
Yeah, so right now with their plan developments, they have underlying zoning districts on each one of those.
Okay.
And I think they have wording, the most restrictive shall apply, or something like that. So that they don't necessarily.
The zoning code and a PDO,
Both.
double zone.
So they could still go through the process of, let's rezone it, and then when they rezone it, do an overlay on a few years after the rezone. Okay.
True.
Yeah.
True.
That'd be the way to, big mega project
Right.
to push what they want.
Yeah, they're a much bigger community, but it was surprising to me that their number of rezonings dropped off dramatically with the adoption of their new code. Because of all those old standards that needed to go through and be amended through the public process. We actually don't have that much big vacant parcels, so it's a little bit different situation for us. So now we're at the very bottom of Maslow's self-actualization, which is staff approval. We don't have to go to the high and mighty for approval on some things. So minor subdivisions is less than 10 lots. An applicant is meeting all the requirements of the zoning code and the subdivision code. And there's access to a public street. That's actually approval at a staff level. If you go above 10 lots, or they're asking for some kind of waiver to the code, that kicks them into a major subdivision, which means they have to bring a preliminary plat to the planning board for your approval. And you have final approval on that. Without that, they cannot proceed on to city council with a final plat, which is pretty much the same thing, but a lot more legal language put on it, and a little bit more precise. And then subdivision improvement agreements, again, we negotiate public improvements. Now we have something called impact fees. So the applicant has an opportunity to say, we're doing improvements above and beyond our project, so we should get a credit for impacts on the overall community and reduce that impact fee credit. We also by code say if you paid a previous, we have a open space or a public facilities fee that went into effect about a year ago, or actually went out of effect and was replaced by the impact fees. If you paid those earlier fees, you get a direct one-to-one credit for that. So those are things that go into subdivision improvement agreement. City council gives final approval, and then final plats really comes, it's almost an obligatory approval at city council. The code says if the public works director and the community development director says it meets all the codes, the council shall adopt or something along that line. So not a lot of discretion when you get to this point. So this was one you saw. You saw the overall development parcels for Littleton Village. You will see again most of these parcels as they further subdivide it for single family or townhouses or patio homes on each one of these parcels. You're actually probably going to be seeing them pretty quickly because they do have a group of builders that's looking at least that east half of the development for all those different housing types, your standard single family, townhouses, and alley-loaded patio home type product. So you'll see those preliminary plats. And then the final plat, very similar. It has all the easements put in place and all the legal language about what can and can't be done in those easements. So, and then also, finally, I guess the lowest level is the site development plan. So you have a commercial development and somebody's doing an addition, for example, or maybe it's vacant and they're doing the initial development and they're meeting all the zoning requirements. That's a staff function. So here's an example of that. The Jeep dealership is putting an addition on the east half. Right here. So they go through the site development plan process, make sure all the landscaping setbacks are correct on that project, and it's approved and moves into building permit right from this process. That's where you have no discretion unless somebody appeals. They have an opportunity. If we say, no, the setback is 75 feet, it's not 30 feet, they can appeal that staff decision to the planning board. So potentially you might see that someday. It's great because we use that as a threat a lot. Believe it or not, most applicants don't want to go to the planning board. So
You called us the high and mighty planning board, I think you called us?
right, the high and mighty. Yeah.
What's wrong with us?
I love coming before you, but other applicants don't. So
It's the late hours we keep, that's what it is.
Drag it on to midnight and kill them, huh?
this is very basic architecture on what that small addition is. So that's basically my take on discretion on cases that will come before our boards and city council. I know it's quick, and you know, I was thinking actually today, if we somehow color coordinate your agenda so you have an idea of where you have a lot of discretion and where you don't, and using some of these colors, or some way to give you a hint that,
Green,
you know what?
yellow, red.
Yeah. Purple, green, yellow, red.
There you go.
Run a flag up by your desk.
What about orange? You had some orange in there.
Could be some orange. What you actually won't see the red because that's the basic staff ones. But yeah, anything we can do to kind of make that clear, or I could, you know, print this up and you can carry it with you to each one of the meetings.
So my comments about the architecture of the Breckenridge Brewery was inappropriate, correct?
I don't remember what those were.
Yeah, it was
Did you say they
a
sucked?
left-handed comment. That was not it.
Make any comment you want.
Yeah,
Out of order.
that's it for me.
Thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to do is just point out real quickly what we're doing at the meet, greet, meet sessions. Put this up.
Next one's tomorrow, right?
Next one's tomorrow at Steeplechase.
I might show up to that one.
Is that in their clubhouse? Do they have a clubhouse there?
It's in that green area that's like right across from Home Depot. I believe we're just setting up out in that big open space area.
There's a pool right there, isn't there?
I think there is a pool right there. Yeah.
Where you sit?
Not so bad.
So
What's
if we
that?
drive in that area, we can kind of find it, follow the
I
sign.
don't know where you park, quite frankly, I'm not sure.
They said there was parking at Home Depot with,
Okay.
with some signage. Are you putting up signage for the
I'm
parking?
not, but hopefully somebody
I don't
is.
mean you specifically.
I didn't know that, so, yeah.
It says on the site where, on the, calendar event, it says they'll put up signage and stuff.
So kind of a start to the neighborhood plans. We contract with Peak Democracy. They run our Open Littleton website. And they developed this tool, actually, we're the kind of the beta plan for it, where each individual gets a QR code. So what we did was just throw up some ideas of aspects of neighborhoods. And then we said, is that a strength, weakness, opportunity, or a threat in your particular neighborhood? So we don't have to get into necessarily where people live. If they want to participate, they fill out their email address and their name, and then they get 4 of these dots. So then they can say, well, parks and open space is a great thing in my neighborhood, but traffic is a real problem. And then use all 4 dots. Then we take a picture of this, we send it to Peak Democracy. A lot of these people are registered, so Peak Democracy knows where they live. They don't tell us where they live, but they can break it into our neighborhoods. So after we get through all these, we can get an idea of where great open space and parks are and where there's bad traffic by the different neighborhoods in the community.
So by property? So they can identify where that comment came from?
So if they're not registered right now, because anybody who's registered with Peak Democracy must give their address, then they'll get an email from Peak Democracy and say, for your input really to work, you must tell us where you are, and then you can participate in it. They don't give us the specific where each one of these people are, but they break them into the geographic areas that are our neighborhoods for our comprehensive plan. So most of these, all of these are open to everybody. It's not necessarily Stern Park neighborhood has to come to the Stern Park one, but the majority of them are because they can walk right over there. So at least we'll get a good idea of where the major issues are in the various neighborhoods. And then what Dennis did was, go ahead and you can pass these out. He actually broke out what the requirements were in our current neighborhood plans for specific neighborhoods. Now, the first one he only had for Stern Park, and so he only got about a dozen comments, and some of them actually didn't live in Stern Park, but at this meeting tomorrow, we'll have one for any neighborhood. So you can pick up and say whether you agree with the current policy or whether you don't. And then some open-ended comments. So it was interesting just looking at it now is some folks still want to see Gallup go through, which is usually where we've really gotten hate mail. So anyhow, we're starting to gather some basic information. I think by the time we get through the summer, I think we'll have at least some good feedback on our neighborhood plans. So come out tomorrow if you get a chance.
What time does it start?
I think it's 4 to 6.
Free
4 to
pizza.
6. Pizza, free pizza. Ice cream
Ice cream
sandwiches.
sandwiches, right?
Yeah, bottles of water. Kurt was there. Kurt made the Stern Park
Ice
one.
cream.
Food? You were there.
Yeah.
He's got the important factors down.
Okay, wrapped up before 9.
Look at that. Oh, we should drag it out.
We don't have to.
thank you, Glenn. That was
Scintillating.
Yes.
You might have introduced yourself. I didn't recognize you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Made a physical
it's been
change.
that long.
It looks very good.
Thank you, thank you.
You dropped about 10 years.
Yeah. That was the idea.
No, it's
I'm
a
gonna go home and
compliment.
shave.
It's a compliment. You looked good before, but now you look
So
even younger.
goatee's out. I was wondering, maybe good shave would do you good.
Razor at the door.
Actually, Paul said my mustache looked pretty good, so I went home and
All right. I think that's it for tonight. Do we know if there's anything in 2 weeks or the next meeting?
I don't believe we do. We have a couple of rezonings. I'm not sure they're ready by, I think that's July 14th.
Okay.
So if there is something you'd like prepared for that, or then we're open to ideas.
Yeah, if anybody on the board has something that is like pressing that they want to know more about or think that we should talk about as a group, feel free to email Glenn and or me, and I'll pass it on to Glenn.
Yeah, maybe go through the chairman, that would be fine with me.
Yeah. I had just administrative question. Whatever happened to the other email program that we got training on? Are we not doing that?
iLegislate, is that the one you're talking
Yeah,
about?
like e-legislate or something?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if we have a password for that.
Whatever happened with that?
It's in use.
iLegislate,
Yeah,
that is up and running.
but we were supposed to get passwords and we don't use it.
My understanding is that IES did not issue passwords, so if you had a password previously, then I'll follow up on it then.
Yeah, I would ask,
We all, when we went to a session on iLegislate to learn how to use it, we had a test username and a test password. Nobody ever got usernames and passwords.
and we never got, I don't know
know
about
it's on
anybody,
the site.
I don't know if anybody else got an email, but I haven't received an email since that meeting
Right.
as to what's going on and whether I should use it or,
It's on the site, though. They're using it on the website.
okay. I would like more information.
Why would they use
Send
it, I
out to the
guess?
board.
That's the new Granicus program, so
Yeah.
basically that is really how they get the agenda, the attachments.
Yeah, it has all the attachments and everything. So,
Yeah.
I will follow up on it tomorrow.
okay.
We really haven't had an agenda since, but.
If we're supposed to be using it, we could potentially do a kind of a refresher course at our next hearing. We have a short meeting. But I know that I'd like to see how to use it again. It doesn't have to be a long meeting, just,
Yeah, I forgot about
I
it
think it
too.
was working right whenever she.
it wasn't even working the day we were doing it. So, okay.
When are we gonna start talking about plans?
Small area plan,
We can do that on the,
Corridor studies.
yeah. Yeah, actually, that's right. That is something that I think Dennis wants to present on July 14th, is the timing of the corridor plans and potentially what the RFP might look like, and get your input on that. That's true.
is there groundwork we should be doing on the other small area plans that really won't be affected by that corridor? You know, the neighborhoods aren't gonna change much. Are we gonna?
Yeah, we
Right.
can trail mark, that's not affected by anything.
Where is that?
Right. It's Alaska or Hawaii.
Yeah, somewhere.
Yeah, find out about kind of that, and maybe our next hearing is kind of an update on,
On those-
Program and-
Yeah, on the work plan.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so as far as the program, so we're not going to send out files anymore. They'll just have to log in and get the agenda and all the attachments? That's how, okay.
but we still want you to tell us that we got mail.
You've got
That's right.
Or you can call us or send us a letter in the mail. All the above.
your city manager, check it out.
Get a letter, check your email.
Yeah. All right, we are adjourned.